The sound of the wind carried through the narrow street that morning, soft but cold. It touched the faces of the people standing at the front gate of a small house where everything felt familiar, yet different that day. It wasn't just any day. It was the kind of day people remembered for the rest of their lives. The kind of day that made the air feel heavier than usual. The soldier stood there with his bag on his shoulder, boots polished, uniform neatly pressed. He looked strong on the outside, but inside he was holding on to everything he loved. He was trying to keep it together, trying to remember every small detail around him. The old wooden fence, the tree near the corner, the sound of birds that always seemed louder in the morning. He knew he would miss all of it. His mother stood by the gate, holding her hands tightly together as if she was afraid they would fall apart if she didn't. She didn't want to cry. She told herself over and over again that she had to be strong for him. She wanted to smile, to give him courage, but her lips trembled and her eyes glistened. She had spent the last few days pretending everything was normal, making his favorite meals, folding his clothes, fixing small things in the house. But now, with the car waiting down the street, the truth was too close to ignore. He was leaving. His younger sister clung to a small flag she had made at school. She had colored it herself and had been waiting to give it to him. She didn't fully understand where he was going or what it meant. She just knew he wouldn't be home for a long time. She stared up at him with wide, confused eyes, trying to memorize his face the way a child does when they know something big is happening but can't explain it. His fiancée stood a few steps away, arms wrapped around herself. She had been quiet all morning, not because she didn't have words to say, but because every word she thought of felt too small. She had spent the night before sitting on the porch with him, talking about their future, about the house they would build, the life they would live together. They made promises in whispers, holding each other under the stars, as if doing so could freeze time. Now the moment had arrived, and the world didn't care about their promises. The soldier took a deep breath and stepped closer to his mother. "I'll be okay," he said softly. His voice wasn't as steady as he wanted it to be, but it was enough. She reached up and touched his face, her hands warm against the cool air. "You come home," she whispered, not as a request, but as a plea from deep within her heart. He nodded and gave her a small smile, one of those smiles people give when they're scared but don't want others to see. His sister finally stepped forward, her little hands holding the flag tightly. "Here," she said in a small voice, "so you don't forget us." He knelt down and took it gently, looking at the crooked lines and uneven colors. It was perfect. "I could never forget you," he said, kissing the top of her head. She threw her arms around his neck and held on, and he let her stay like that a little longer than he probably should have. Then he turned to the woman he loved. They looked at each other without saying anything at first. Words felt too fragile for what they were both feeling. She stepped forward, put her hands on his chest, and rested her forehead against his. "I'll wait for you," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "I'll come back," he said. She nodded, but there was a quiet fear in her eyes. She had seen stories on the news. She had heard people whisper about how long soldiers were gone and how sometimes they didn't return the same. But she pushed those thoughts away and forced a smile through her tears. They held each other for a few seconds that felt like forever. The driver by the car cleared his throat softly, reminding them it was time. The soldier stepped back slowly, like someone trying to hold on to something that kept slipping through their fingers. He lifted his bag and walked toward the car. His mother's hand flew to her mouth to hold back a sob. His sister started waving the little flag, shouting his name over and over again as if it could keep him from disappearing. His fiancée stayed still, her arms wrapped around herself again, her eyes fixed on him like he was the only thing in the world. Before getting into the car, he turned around one last time. He wanted to remember that moment forever. The house, the faces, the smell of morning, the feeling of being loved and wanted. He raised his hand in a small wave and gave them a smile that carried both hope and pain. The car door closed with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. The engine started. The wheels rolled forward. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Inside the car, the soldier stared out of the window without blinking. He didn't want to cry. He told himself he had to be strong, that this was what he chose. But even strong people have hearts, and his was heavy. The road stretched ahead of him, long and uncertain. He thought of the promise he made. He thought of the little flag in his pocket. He thought of her smile. He promised himself that no matter how hard it got, he would come back. Time passed slowly on that ride. Every tree, every turn, every stretch of the road seemed to speak to him in a language only he could hear. It wasn't just about leaving home. It was about leaving a piece of himself behind. The base was loud and busy when he arrived. There were other soldiers, some hugging their families for the last time, some standing alone with quiet faces. He watched them and realized that everyone there carried their own story, their own goodbyes. It made him feel less alone, but it didn't make the ache in his chest any lighter. As he stood in line with his bag at his feet, the world around him shifted. He was no longer just the man from the small house on the corner. He was now a soldier, part of something bigger, something that would change him in ways he couldn't yet understand. Night came quickly. He lay on a narrow bunk with a thin blanket staring at the ceiling. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, mixed with quiet voices and the rustling of gear. He pulled out the little flag from his pocket, smoothing the crumpled paper with his fingers. It smelled faintly of home. He closed his eyes and pictured his mother at the gate, his sister's tiny hands, and the way the woman he loved pressed her forehead against his. It wasn't just a memory. It was a lifeline. He whispered softly to himself, "I'll come back." He didn't know then how much those words would carry him through. He didn't know how many nights he'd lie awake in places far from home, holding on to the sound of their voices in his head. But in that moment, under that dim light, his heart still believed everything would be the same when he returned. He imagined walking back down that same street, hearing his sister's laughter, feeling his mother's arms around him, seeing her waiting at the gate with the same smile. He didn't imagine change. He didn't imagine silence. He didn't imagine an empty gate. The night grew colder, and he pulled the blanket closer around his shoulders. He thought about all the stories he had heard growing up, stories about soldiers who left and came back to everything they loved. He wanted to be one of those stories. He needed to believe he would be. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, stars scattered across it like tiny promises. He lay there listening to the soft hum of the building, the distant sound of someone whispering a prayer. He added his own silent words to the night, not loud enough for anyone to hear, but strong enough to keep in his heart. The world was about to become unfamiliar. He would see places he had never seen, meet people he didn't know, face things he had never faced. But right now it was still the night before it all truly began, and in that quiet he still had home in his heart. The soldier turned onto his side, clutching the little flag in his hand. He thought about her face, the way she tried not to cry. He thought about his sister's voice shouting his name. He thought about the way his mother's hands trembled as she touched his face. Sleep came slowly, like a shy visitor. When it finally arrived, it brought dreams of home, of laughter, of warm mornings where everything felt right. He didn't know how long it would be before he saw that house again. He didn't know how much the world would change in his absence, but for now that didn't matter. In his dreams, the gate was still open, the house was still warm, and the people he loved were still waiting. Some promises are fragile, but in that moment, his promise felt unbreakable. He believed in it with everything he had, and sometimes belief is the only thing that keeps a heart from breaking too soon. The days after arrival were a blur of orders, drills, and new faces. The soldier quickly realized that the world he had known, the one with familiar streets, smells of morning coffee, and the laughter of his family, was gone. It was replaced by something harsher, louder, and unforgiving. Yet each time his hands itched to hold a letter from home, he reminded himself that the people he loved were out there somewhere, waiting. He needed that thought to survive. The first weeks were the hardest. He had never been away for more than a few weeks before. Now suddenly he was in a place where every sound seemed sharper, every shadow felt dangerous. He learned quickly that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. Waiting was part of every day. Waiting for orders, waiting for a chance to rest, waiting for a letter that sometimes came too late or not at all. Letters became his lifeline. Every envelope from home was like a small window into the life he had left behind. He carried them with him, folded carefully into his pocket, reading them over and over when the world around him felt too heavy. Sometimes he imagined her words as if she were sitting beside him, brushing back his hair, holding his hand, telling him everything would be okay. He needed those moments. War changed people. He saw friends fall beside him in ways that left marks no one could see. He felt fear and guilt, exhaustion and longing all at once. At times, he questioned whether he was strong enough to keep going. But then he remembered the little flag, the smiles at the gate, the promises whispered in the quiet before dawn. He couldn't let those memories fade. They were all he had of home, and they were enough to keep him moving forward. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The soldier learned to carry himself differently, to hide pain behind a calm face, to speak in measured tones so that no one would sense how fragile he felt. He became someone who could survive almost anything, even as he missed the small things more than anything: his sister's laughter, the smell of breakfast cooking, the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor of his house. Those details were gone, but he held them in his mind, pressing them close like treasures. Sometimes, during quiet moments, he would write letters of his own, imagining she would read them, imagining his words could cross the miles and bring comfort. He told her about the small things, the color of the sky at dawn, the way the wind smelled near the hills, the friends who made him laugh despite everything. He didn't tell her about the fear that clawed at him, about the nights he spent staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Those things he kept for himself, storing them where no one could touch them. Evenings were the hardest. When the day ended and the soldiers settled in their bunks, the quiet made the distance feel larger. He would lie on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, tracing the lines and cracks as if he could map a way back home. Sometimes he whispered to himself, "I'll come back," like a prayer. It was a small ritual, something to remind him that he had a life to return to, a life waiting for him, even if it felt impossibly far away. News from home was unpredictable. Some letters arrived quickly, others never came at all. He learned not to hope too much, and yet hope refused to leave him. Every time he saw an envelope in the mailbag, his heart would skip a beat. And every time it was empty or delayed, a small part of him sank, but he refused to let it drown him. He remembered her face, the way she had pressed her forehead to his, promising to wait. He had to believe she meant it. There were nights when fear became unbearable. Explosions, chaos, and the unknown filled the world around him. He clutched his little pocket of memories tighter, closing his eyes and imagining the gate at home, imagining the laughter of his sister, imagining his mother's arms around him. In those moments, the war didn't feel as heavy. It never lasted long, but it reminded him why he kept going. The soldier also learned about loss in ways he could not have imagined. Friends who had joked beside him, laughed with him, shared dreams with him were gone. He attended small private ceremonies, feeling the silence that followed like a heavy cloak around his shoulders. Each loss reminded him how fragile life was, how fleeting a moment could be, and how important it was to hold on to the things he loved while he still could. Even with all the pain and fear, there were small victories. He learned to cook a simple meal over a fire, to fix small equipment, to navigate terrain that at first had seemed impossible. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, was a reminder that he could endure, that he was more than the war, that he could survive, that he could come back. In rare, quiet moments, he allowed himself to imagine home. He pictured the garden his mother had tended, the way his sister would run barefoot on the grass, the way sunlight fell through the windows in the morning. He imagined sitting with her, drinking tea and talking quietly, imagining laughter and normalcy that had been stolen from him for now. These daydreams became a secret world he could visit when reality was too hard to bear. The soldier also met others like him, men and women who carried memories of homes far away, who loved people they could not touch, who held on to hope in the face of despair. They shared stories in whispers, in letters, in small smiles when no one was looking. It was a comfort knowing he was not alone, that others understood what it felt like to leave everything behind. Over time, he changed in ways he could feel, but not always explain. The war made him more cautious, quieter, careful with his words and emotions, but it also made him more appreciative of the little things. The sound of birds in the morning, the first sip of tea, a letter from home that smelled faintly of familiar paper. Those things became treasures. They were reminders that life existed outside the chaos, that one day perhaps he could return to them. He also held on to promises to his family, to the woman he loved, to himself. Each time fear threatened to pull him under, he reminded himself of the little flag, of her whisper, of the warmth of the gate. He repeated the words to himself quietly at night, letting them echo through the darkness, giving him strength. "I'll come back. I'll come back. Months passed. Seasons changed. Letters became more precious. Calls were rare, brief, and sometimes confusing. But every small connection to home became a lifeline. He marked the days carefully, counting down, imagining the moment he would finally step off the bus, finally see the gate, finally see the people who had waited for him. And yet, even with hope in his heart, a small worry never left him. He wondered what would be waiting for him when the day finally came. Would they be the same? Would life have moved on without him? Would he recognize the faces he had memorized? These thoughts were dangerous, and he tried to push them away. Still, they lingered in quiet corners of his mind, gnawing softly at his hope. Still, he endured. He found strength in small victories, in letters, in quiet moments of imagining home. He survived the days that felt unbearable, knowing that each one brought him closer to the life he had left behind. And though he did not know it yet, the home he would return to had changed in ways he could not imagine. The soldier became someone who could endure anything because he had no choice. He became someone who clung to love and memory like a lifeline. And most importantly, he became someone who refused to let go of hope, even when the world around him was harsh, even when the nights were cold and lonely. In his heart he carried the sound of laughter, the smell of cooking, the small flag, the whispered promises. He carried all of it carefully, folded into the corners of his mind where no one could take it away. And it was enough to make him brave, enough to make him survive, enough to keep him moving forward. Through the long days, the nights, the fear, and the pain, he held on to the thought that one day he would return. He held on to the image of the gate, the house, and the people he loved. And every time he felt weak, every time the world threatened to overwhelm him, he whispered to himself again, "I'll come back." Those words became more than a promise. They became his anchor, his reason to continue, his reason to believe in something beyond the darkness around him. And though the journey was far from over, though the world was harsh and uncertain, the soldier never let go of that hope. It was a fragile hope, delicate as the little flag he carried, but it was enough. And that hope would carry him through the days he could not see, through the nights he could not escape, through the years he could not imagine. It was the promise of home, and for a soldier, sometimes that was all you needed to survive. The journey home felt both impossibly long and strangely familiar. Every mile of road, every passing town brought a mix of anticipation and unease. The soldier stared out the window, his hands gripping the edge of his seat, his mind replaying memories he had clung to for years. He imagined the gate, the faces, the voices, the warmth he remembered. He imagined laughter and light, as though nothing had changed while he was away. He told himself to be ready, that the world might be different, that time changes everyone. But deep down he refused to believe it could be so different that the people he loved would no longer be waiting. That thought felt impossible. He held on to it as if it were a shield against uncertainty. As the bus pulled into his hometown, he noticed small changes immediately. A new store at the corner, a street light that hadn't been there before, houses that had been repainted or replaced. The world he had left seemed to have moved on without him, and it made his chest tighten. But he focused on the one thing that mattered, the house at the end of the street, the small wooden gate where his family had stood. He got off the bus with careful steps, his uniform neat, his boots heavy on the pavement. He walked slowly, trying to memorize everything, to take in the sights and smells that he had once known so well. The house looked the same at first glance, but something in the air felt wrong, subtle but impossible to ignore. He approached the gate, expecting to see someone waiting, expecting to hear voices calling his name. But there was nothing. Silence stretched across the yard, thick and unfamiliar. His hand reached for the latch, almost trembling, and the garden looked strangely empty. The flowers his mother had tended were gone, replaced by small patches of unkempt grass. The porch, which he had climbed every morning as a child, looked worn, quiet, and deserted. He called out softly, "Mom, sister, I'm home." His voice sounded foreign in the quiet street. No response came, only the wind moving through the trees, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke from someone's chimney, but not the familiar smell of home he remembered. Panic flickered briefly in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Maybe they were just inside. Maybe they were busy. Maybe this was only a strange moment. A pause before the familiar faces appeared. He knocked on the door. A stranger opened it. The soldier froze. The woman standing there looked confused and wary, as though she had been startled by the knock. "Can I help you?" she asked. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. I live here," he said finally, voice small and uncertain. The woman blinked, stepping back slightly. "I'm sorry, this house belongs to my family now," she said gently but firmly. "Do you need help?" His heart began to pound. He backed away slowly, confused, unable to understand. How could this be? How could the home he had dreamed of for years, the home that had kept him going through fear and war, belong to someone else? He stumbled down the steps, gripping the railing as if it could keep him upright. For a moment, the world felt unsteady. Memories flooded him. His mother's smile, his sister's tiny hands, the woman he loved pressing her forehead to his. And now none of it existed here. The world he had carried in his heart for so long was gone. He walked to the edge of the yard, trying to process it all. His mind searched for explanations, excuses, anything that could make sense. Perhaps they had moved temporarily. Perhaps something had happened he didn't know about. He could not imagine that everything he had loved, everything he had promised himself he would return to, could vanish like this. He remembered his sister's small flag, folded neatly in his uniform pocket, and pulled it out. The sight of it, once so comforting, now brought a sharp ache. It was a symbol of hope, of home, of waiting. And yet here he was, standing in the quiet yard, and it was no longer enough. He wandered the street, seeking familiarity. A small shop where he had bought candy as a boy was now a coffee shop. The park where he and his sister had played was fenced off and overgrown. The bakery where his mother had taken him for treats on Saturdays had closed. Everything he once knew had changed. He realized painfully that life had continued in his absence, even when he had clung to hope that it would wait for him. Hours passed. He walked slowly, unsure where to go, feeling the weight of lost years pressing on his shoulders. He asked neighbors gently if they remembered his family, if they knew where his mother and sister had gone. They told him pieces of the story. His mother had sold the house after struggling financially. His sister had moved to live with relatives, and the woman he loved, believing he would never return, had started a life elsewhere. Each answer hit like a cold wind, a reminder that the life he had imagined returning to was gone. The streets he had walked as a boy felt unfamiliar, even hostile, and the memories that had sustained him through fear and war now felt like cruel illusions. He sat on a bench in the park he had once loved, staring at the ground. He thought about the letters, the promises, the whispered words of love, and realized that time had passed without him. The world had moved on, and for the first time in years the soldier felt truly, deeply alone. Tears blurred his vision, but he let them fall. He had held himself together for so long, through months of waiting, through nights of fear, through the unimaginable experiences of war. But now, standing in a quiet town that looked like home but was not, he allowed himself to break. Memories came in fragments. The smell of breakfast in the morning, his sister's laughter as she chased a ball down the street, the soft strength of his mother's hands pressing against his face. All of it felt distant, unreachable. The world had changed, and he had been left behind in ways he could not have prepared for. Even as pain gripped him, he tried to remember the lessons he had learned. He had survived war, had endured fear, had faced loss before. He knew that somehow he would have to survive this too, but surviving it was different from imagining it. This was no longer a story of hope or courage in the distance. It was a confrontation with reality he hadn't anticipated. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets. The soldier remained seated on the bench, letting the day fade around him. He thought about what home had meant, what it had promised, and how those promises had shifted without his presence. His heart ached, not just for the people he loved, but for the years that had passed, for the small moments he had missed, for the laughter and light that now existed only in memory. Yet, even in this quiet despair, a small spark remained. He had survived impossible circumstances before. He had endured the unimaginable, carried love across continents, and returned. Perhaps now he could find a way to endure this new reality too. Perhaps he could learn to build something new, even as he grieved the life he had expected to return to. For the first time since leaving home, the soldier felt a mixture of grief and determination. He had been gone for years, and life had moved on without him. But he could not let that erase everything he had carried in his heart. He would remember, he would honor, he would survive. And though the gate remained empty, Though the house belonged to strangers, and though the people he loved were no longer waiting, he understood something vital. Home was not just a place. It was a feeling, a memory, a bond. And even if the world outside had changed, he could carry it inside himself. That night, as he walked slowly back to the small inn where he had rented a room, he held the little flag in his hands. Its colors were faded, its edges worn, but it still meant something. It was proof that hope could survive even when the world seemed to have forgotten. He hung it carefully by the window, letting it catch the moonlight. And as he lay down on the unfamiliar bed, he whispered softly to himself, "I'll find my way. I'll make it through." The pain of loss was heavy and the future was uncertain, but the soldier had survived too much to give in completely. He closed his eyes, letting memories of laughter, warmth, and love carry him into a restless sleep. The journey was far from over. The world had changed and so had he, but he was still here. And as long as he was here, there was hope that even broken things could be rebuilt, even lost dreams could be reimagined, and even a heart shattered by years away could find a way forward. The soldier spent the first few days wandering the town, trying to piece together what had happened while he was away. Each familiar street corner, each small shop reminded him of something he had lost. He tried calling the places he remembered, friends, neighbors, even old teachers, but most had moved on, and those who remained had only fragments of the story. Finally, he managed to contact his sister. Her voice on the phone was trembling, soft, almost too quiet to hear. I didn't think you'd come back so soon," she said, and he could hear the weight of guilt in every word. "I'm home," he said simply. The words felt strange on his own tongue, as if he were trying to claim something that no longer belonged to him. There was silence for a moment, and then she spoke again. You need to know, Mom. She couldn't keep the house. Things got hard after you left. She sold it a few years ago. And she passed away last year." The words hit him like a sudden cold wind. He had imagined her waiting at the gate, smiling, arms open, but instead she was gone. The home he had pictured in his mind, the one he had carried across oceans and war zones, no longer existed, and neither did she. He sank into the nearest bench, gripping the phone tightly as though holding on to it could bring her back. Tears came unbidden, his body trembling with grief. He had survived fear, pain, and war, but nothing had prepared him for this. The world had moved on without him, and he had returned to find it changed in the most devastating way. His sister continued, her voice shaking. "I tried to manage things, but it was too much. I moved away, trying to find a life somewhere else. And your fiancée, she didn't wait. She thought you might never come back." The soldier's heart felt like it had been ripped from his chest. The woman he had loved, the one who had promised to wait, the one whose presence had been a lifeline through endless nights of fear and longing. She had moved on. She had believed the promises were broken, and in her own way she had survived by letting go. He didn't speak for a long moment. The phone felt heavy in his hand, a small lifeline that connected him to pieces of the world he had lost. Where is she?" he asked finally, voice barely audible. She's living in another town now," his sister replied softly. "I didn't want to tell you over the phone, but I couldn't protect you from the truth any longer." The soldier hung up without another word, sitting on the bench and staring at the ground. His hands were trembling. The little flag he had carried from home now felt heavier than ever, a symbol of hope that had been shattered. Every memory he had clung to, the gate, the laughter, the whispered promises, felt like a dream he could never touch again. He walked the streets without direction, passing the places he had once loved, seeing them through eyes that now understood loss in a way he never had before. The bakery, the park, the corner shop, they were all the same and yet completely different. People passed him without recognition, unaware of the life he had once lived here, unaware of the soldier who had carried hope across continents and years. Eventually, he stopped at a quiet corner of the town, a small cafe that had survived the changes of time. He went inside, not because he wanted anything to eat or drink, but because he needed a moment of stillness. He sat at a small table, staring out the window at the street, and let the grief wash over him. For hours, he thought of his mother, imagining her smiling face, the way she had held him close, the warmth he had taken for granted. He thought of his sister, small and bright, waving the flag at the gate, and of the woman he had loved holding him tightly and promising to wait. All of it was gone. The people, the home, the life he had dreamed of returning to. Everything had moved on without him. He realized then that grief was not a single moment, not a single tear. It was a weight that pressed down on every part of him, a presence that filled the spaces where hope had once lived. It was silent and unrelenting, and for the first time he felt truly broken. The soldier walked through the town that evening, the sun low in the sky, shadows stretching across the streets. He passed the old schoolyard where he and his sister had played, the bench where he had once sat with his mother, the corner where he had first kissed the woman he loved. Every place was a reminder of what he had lost, a reminder that time had continued without him. He stopped in front of the old gate, now overgrown with weeds and ivy, and placed his hand on the wood. The memories were overwhelming, laughter, warmth, love, but they belonged to a world that no longer existed. He closed his eyes, letting the grief take him fully, and allowed himself to cry openly for the first time in years. Night fell, and the soldier found himself wandering to the edge of town, to a small hill that overlooked the houses and streets he had known. The lights twinkled below, but they felt distant, disconnected from the life he had carried in his heart. He sat on the grass, clutching the little flag in his hands, and whispered to the night. "I tried," he said softly. "I tried to come back." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of life below, but nothing answered him. He realized that survival had been only part of the journey. Returning home had been the hope that kept him alive, but surviving the reality of what awaited him was another challenge entirely. Days passed slowly. The soldier stayed in a small rented room on the edge of town, spending his hours walking the streets, sitting in quiet corners, and trying to process everything. The town had changed, the people he loved had changed, and he felt like a stranger in the place he had once called home. He found his sister again, visiting her small apartment in another part of the town. She welcomed him with a quiet hug, tears in her eyes, and for a brief moment he felt a small comfort. They talked softly about what had happened, about the years he had missed, and about the family they had lost along the way. But even in her presence, the soldier felt the weight of absence, the absence of his mother, the absence of the woman he loved, the absence of the home he had carried in his heart. He realized that grief could not be escaped, that it could not be negotiated. It had to be felt fully, acknowledged, and eventually understood, and so he let himself feel it, every sharp edge of it, every ache that ran through his body and soul. One evening, sitting on the porch of his sister's apartment, he looked at the sky and allowed himself to imagine what could come next. The house was gone, the people had moved on, and the life he had dreamed of returning to no longer existed. But he still had himself, and he still had the memories that had carried him through the darkest nights of war. He realized that perhaps surviving wasn't about returning to what he had left behind. Perhaps surviving was about finding a way to carry the past with him while building something new, something that could exist in the changed world he had returned to. The soldier spent the night staring at the stars, thinking about what it meant to lose everything and still stand. He thought about the courage it had taken to endure war, the patience it had taken to wait for letters, and the strength it had taken to return home, even when home was not what he had imagined. By the time the first light of dawn touched the city, he had made a quiet decision. He would grieve. He would remember. He would carry the memories of his mother, his sister, and the woman he loved. But he would also begin to find a way forward. Even broken, even lost, he would survive. The journey ahead was uncertain. The road was heavy with grief and longing, but the soldier knew one truth. He had faced fear. He had faced loss, and he had endured. He had returned to a home that no longer existed, and yet he was still standing, and standing, he realized, was the first step toward healing. The soldier sat quietly in his sister's small apartment, looking out the window at the street below. Life moved on. People passed by. Laughter echoed from distant homes, and the town had settled into its usual rhythm. But for him, everything was different. He had returned expecting home, expecting familiarity, expecting warmth. Instead, he found absence, change, and loss. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel everything he had held inside, the fear, the longing, the grief, and the anger. It came in waves, heavy and relentless. He cried freely, let his body shake with sorrow, and allowed himself to remember. He remembered the small gate, the laughter of his sister, the gentle hands of his mother, the whispered promises of love. They were gone, but they were still his. He carried them inside himself. Days passed slowly. He wandered the streets at first, visiting old places and seeing them through new eyes. He watched children play in the park where he had once run with his sister. He walked past the corner shop where he had bought candy as a boy, now run by strangers. He saw the new families who had moved into the houses he had once known. Each sight reminded him of what he had lost, but it also reminded him that life continued, even when he wasn't ready for it to. One morning, he decided to do something he hadn't dared to do before. He visited the local community center, a place where veterans sometimes met. Quietly and without ceremony, he sat in the back, listening to others share their stories. Men and women who had been away from home, who had lost things, who had returned to find the world different. Their words resonated with him, their pain familiar, their hope small but steadfast. For the first time, he felt a small spark of connection. He was not alone in his grief, not alone in his loss. Others had carried memories across years and miles, and they were finding ways to move forward. He realized that he could too. He started slowly, taking small steps each day. He visited the places that still felt familiar, not to cling to the past, but to honor it. He helped at the community center, volunteering for small tasks, connecting with others who understood him. Each act, no matter how minor, reminded him that he could still find purpose. The little flag he had carried from home was always with him. He pinned it to the wall of his sister's apartment, letting it catch the morning light. It was a reminder of where he came from, of the people he had loved, and of the strength it had given him to survive. It was a symbol not just of hope, but of resilience, the proof that he could endure loss and still find a way forward. He also began to rebuild relationships in small ways. With his sister, he shared stories of his time away, and she shared what had happened in the years he was gone. They laughed softly, cried together, and found comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't the same as having his mother, but it was a new kind of family, built from love and understanding, even in the absence of what had once been. The woman he had loved remained a quiet memory, a part of him that he carried with care. He realized he could honor that love without holding on to it in a way that hurt him. He allowed himself to imagine her happy, living her life, and he felt a strange mix of pain and peace. He could love and let go at the same time. That understanding, painful as it was, became part of his healing. Slowly, he began to find joy again in simple things. He walked in the mornings, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He cooked meals for himself and his sister, shared quiet dinners and conversations that stretched into the night. He laughed at small jokes, allowed himself to enjoy music, and started to notice the beauty in ordinary days. Each small joy was a victory, a step toward reclaiming a life that felt lost. He also remembered the lessons of the war, the courage, the patience, the endurance. Those lessons were not just for survival in distant lands, they were for life. For the quiet battles he now faced at home, he realized that strength was not just about facing fear, but about facing grief, disappointment, and change, and still choosing to move forward. One afternoon he visited the edge of town, standing on the hill where he had once looked down at the streets below, imagining a home that no longer existed. He held the little flag, feeling its worn edges, and he whispered softly, "I will keep moving forward." For the first time in years, the words felt real, not just a promise, but a choice. He started to imagine a future that was his to shape, not the future he had left behind, not the life he had dreamed of returning to, but a new one, built on memory, resilience, and the quiet courage of facing reality. He knew it would not be easy. There would be moments of sorrow, reminders of loss, and days that felt impossibly heavy, but he also knew he could endure. The soldier realized that returning home was not the same as reclaiming it. Home had changed, people had moved on, and life had shifted in ways beyond his control. But that did not mean he was defeated. He could build a new home in the heart of himself, carry the love and memories he had cherished, and still find ways to be part of the world around him. He reconnected with friends, old neighbors, and the community he had once known. He shared small stories, helped where he could, and allowed himself to be part of life again. The town that had felt foreign at first slowly became familiar, not the same as before, but a new kind of home that he could inhabit. Over time, the soldier began to forgive, not just the world for changing, but himself for the years he had missed. He allowed himself to let go of bitterness, to accept the reality of loss, and to find peace in what remained. He realized that grief and hope could exist together, that love could be remembered without causing constant pain, and that life could continue even when dreams had been shattered. One evening, sitting with his sister on the small porch, he looked at the sky streaked with the colors of sunset. They spoke quietly, sharing memories and hopes, laughter mingling with tears. He felt the warmth of connection again. A small but powerful reminder that life, even after profound loss, could still hold beauty. He realized that he had survived more than just the war. He had survived absence, grief, and the heartbreak of returning to a home that no longer existed. He had endured the loss of people he loved, and the life he had expected to return to, and in surviving he discovered a strength he hadn't fully known before, a strength to build, to love, and to hope again. The little flag pinned on the wall caught the evening light, and he smiled softly. It was a symbol of the past, yes, but also a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even when life takes away what we hold dear, the heart has the capacity to carry memory, love, and hope forward. In the weeks that followed, the soldier took small steps toward a new life. He found work that gave him purpose, friendships that brought comfort, and moments of peace that reminded him why he had fought so hard to survive. He kept the memories of his family and the woman he loved close, but he also allowed himself to exist in the present, to embrace the life he had, not the one he had lost. And one quiet morning, standing on the hill where he had once watched the town below, he raised the little flag, letting the wind carry it gently. It was worn and faded, but it still stood, just like him. He whispered to the sky, to the memories, to the absent voices he loved, "I am still here. I will live. I will endure." The soldier had returned home to find nothing as he had expected. The world had changed, people had moved on, and his dreams of reunion had been broken. But in the process, he found something else, a new beginning, built from memory, love, and the quiet courage of facing reality. He understood now that home is not just a place or a person. Home is a feeling carried within, a sense of belonging, a resilience that refuses to be erased by time or absence. And though his heart had been broken, he had survived, and he would continue to live, carrying the past with him, and moving forward into a life of his own making. The journey had been long, painful, and uncertain. But in the end, the soldier found strength in what remained. He found hope in small moments, peace in memory, and courage in the act of choosing to continue. And in that choice, he discovered the truest form of home, inside himself, ready to carry forward no matter what the world had taken. And so even broken, even changed, even grieving, he stood. The soldier had returned, and though nothing was the same, he would live, he would endure, and he would find life again. Years passed, and the soldier gradually settled into a life he had never imagined while he was away. The town had changed even more, but he had found his place within it. He worked with young people, sharing lessons learned from his journey, helping those who had faced loss, hardship, or uncertainty. His presence became a quiet reassurance for others, a living proof that even after devastation, life could continue. He never forgot the family he had lost. Every morning, he touched the little flag pinned to his wall, remembering his mother's warmth, his sister's laughter, and the love that had once held him together. These memories were no longer a source of pain, but a foundation upon which he built his life. They were reminders of courage, of love, and of endurance. The soldier learned to embrace moments of joy without guilt. He laughed freely with friends he had made, shared meals with neighbors, and allowed himself to feel love again. Not the same as before, but new, gentle, and healing. The woman he had loved remained a part of him, but in time he understood that letting her go had freed both of them. She had chosen her path, and he had found his own. On quiet nights, he sometimes returned to the hill overlooking the town. The streets below were alive with lights and voices, a testament to life continuing even as years passed. He raised the little flag to the wind, smiling softly. It had weathered storms, traveled miles, and survived time just as he had. He realized that home is not always a place you return to. Sometimes it is a life you create, and though the past remained, he had learned to live in the present, to embrace what he had and to honor what was lost. The soldier had been gone for years, and the world had moved on. What he found at home had broken him, yes, but it also taught him the deepest lessons of endurance, hope, and human strength. He understood now that life was not about returning unchanged. It was about carrying the heart with you wherever you go and finding a way to keep it alive. And with that understanding, he finally felt whole.